I mentioned before that it is possible to have restaurant quality steak right at your own home. It takes a very tender cut of beef, the right amount of heat in a well-seasoned pan to get the proper crusting we want in meats. Although I demonstrated this before, I didn't emphasize on the sides. In this video, we are going to do just that. You see, I have some leftover old apples in the refrigerator, and unfortunately it turned this way with time. And not wanting to throw them away, I decided to core and slice them into pieces. Peeling a whole garlic and leaving the cloves intact, I also peeled and sliced some onions and set that aside. Combining these with the sliced apples, our stage is set for a nice steak dish. Next is the meat. I insist a very marbled ribeye for it has the well-balanced tenderness and flavor. Ribeye has a tendency to keep fat within the muscle fibers that keep it relatively flavorful and tender unlike other cuts of beef. Because usually a tender piece of meat keeps its moisture and tenderness when it is relatively raw, and therefore medium rare is great for this cut. The only way to maintain this is a thick cut. For this purpose, I insist the meat have a thickness of at least 1.5 inch. Season the meat with salt and pepper and set aside. While preparing the vegetables, one should have a thick pan that retains heat resting on top of the stove on high. In this way, once we start to sear the meat, it is already well preheated that the temperature would not fall once it is in contact with it. More or less, the temperature will be about 800 to 1000 degrees Fahrenheit when it is ready. To achieve this, the pan needs to be on the stove with the flame set on high for about 5 minutes or more. So now we are ready to cook. With the pan very hot and noticeably smoking, place the meat on the center and leave it there for the desired amount of time to achieve searing while steaming the meat within. Usually with the steak refrigerator cold and at the mentioned 1.5 inch thick cut, ribeye would be medium rare if given 6 minutes on the first side and 5 on the other. Now there is a formula to this. With the 6 and 6 minus 1 equals medium rare, usually add another minute for varying degrees of doneness, as in 7-6 for medium, 8 and 7 for medium well done, and the opposite, meaning 5-4 for rare. In any case, you're only given one chance at turning because it is the prolonged contact with heat that the steak achieves its crusty flavor. Do we want a smoky flavor? Yes, we do. Achieving this effect in the kitchen is possible using the paper plate. In the final 2 minutes of searing the first side, apply a paper plate. Now in this case, I used the one that was used to season and dry the meat on top of the steak while it is on the pan. Do not fear the plate will catch fire. It won't. The plate is generally far from the heat itself. Once the time to sear the first side is up, we now turn the meat, replace the plate, and sear for the remaining minutes to achieve the doneness we want. Now sometime about a minute or so into the searing of the second side, remove the plate and saute on the sides of the pan the garlic, onions, and apples. Now give it a little stir and replace the plate. Once in a while, give the vegetables a bit of a stir to caramelize them evenly. Replace the plate after doing so. All these taking place while the meat is searing undisturbed. Once the total minutes for the searing of the second side are up, remove the meat from the pan and place it on a warm plate. This first plate is called a resting plate because it is where the meat rests for about 5 minutes or so to get rid of the first juices, which usually is bloody and make the presentation unpleasant to look at. Now, going back to the garlic, onions, and apples, which by this time are caramelized and soft, keep the flame high and get a sweet wine with a high alcohol content such as sherry. Pour about 1/5 of a cup of sherry and tilt the pan on the side and let it catch fire to start the flambe. This will give further flavor to your vegetable side. Meanwhile, drain off the bloody juices off the rested meat. While still warm, apply a pat of truffle or ordinary butter on the meat to provide a wholesome butter flavor while giving it a glisten that makes it more attractive. Spread the butter well, and again, drain the juices, leaving it along with the excess butter on the resting plate. Now for presentation. First and foremost, you have to have a well-heated plate where the steak would be. Well heated is a must because a cold plate would make the fat congeal, and not to mention the steak would be cold, which would be unpleasant to eat. For this purpose, I have already more or less during the searing of the second side of the meat, preheated this white plate in a microwave or a highly heated oven for about 5 minutes. With this plate on the table and using a fork, pierce the steak on the side. Drain out the juices and butter, then let it stay in the middle or on the side if accompaniments are desired with the steak. Lastly, just to add to the final garnish, a dash of green usually is a good color contrast to the glistening caramelized brown of the steak. Parsley flakes from the local grocery store is a good accompaniment. If not, even freshly chopped parsley would do. After the addition of these last finishing touches, you are ready to enjoy this delectable dish. And rightfully so. Is that a nice medium rare steak, I say?